Thank you so much for coming. It's really great to be here with you. So as we start to settle into our time together, I want to invite all of you to participate in a 60-second exercise. Help you understand a little bit of what I do with people. So if it's comfortable to you, you can start to drift your eyes closed. If that's not comfortable, just take a downward gaze. And we're just going to focus in on our breath for 1 minute. Noticing your inhale, noticing your exhale, and then bringing your attention down into your belly and allow the muscles of your stomach.
Now try to speak into that.
From the beginning?
No, that's all right.
Okay. Allowing the muscles of your stomach to relax, almost like you have a little Buddha belly. And together we're going to take 5 more breaths, finding a comfortable inhale for 5, and an exhale when it feels good to you. Inhaling 4. Inhaling 3. Inhaling 2. And as you near the end of your countdown, you can start to coming back to where you are with all of our press members around us, beginning to drift the eyes open. So during this 1-minute experience, we stimulated the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body. It comes out from our brains, runs down our spinal column, and then innervates in our stomach. So what we say, what we mean when we say innervate is the nerve endings are most densely clustered in our stomachs. So together, just by loosening up our stomach muscles and focusing on our breath, we sent our body the signal that we are safe and that it's time to relax. I entered this field pretty early on. At age 24, I had the most beautiful wedding to a gentle and really handsome man. And the beginning of our marriage was a blissful fairy tale. But just a couple months shy of our first anniversary, like a switch had been flipped. My husband showed himself to be a very different person. I didn't know when I signed that marriage license that I would be signing up for my life's greatest trial, or the grief, inner turmoil, or the abuse that would follow. But I also didn't know the joy and fulfillment that would come into my life as a result from waking up to the truth and then taking steps in my recovery. My name is Jillian Guinta. I'm a mind-body science and trauma recovery educator. I teach what I've learned in my own recovery journey. I help people recover from trauma, creating post-traumatic growth. So no matter who we are or what we've been through, we can find the light in our darkest moments. My professional background is multidisciplinary. I have over 750 hours of training in therapeutically oriented yoga, a certificate in applied positive psychology, all from schools in New York City, as well as a master's degree from the same institution that would award me Professor of the Year just months before I would leave my doctoral work to move to Louisiana and begin teaching about trauma. So, as a teacher, I have a couple of learning goals. First, we're going to learn what trauma is, the factors that make us more susceptible to trauma and symptoms of PTSD, how the traumatized brain acts as compared to a healthy brain, the role of the body in trauma, and how the nervous system chooses our response to trauma. So first, we'll start with an analogy. Trauma is any event that overwhelms our ability to cope. So we can compare our normal life events to an apple. In normal life, even throughout really challenging events, it would be similar to taking bites of the apple, swallowing, digesting, assimilating the nutrients, and being able to make use of that. We learn, we cultivate resilience, we make meaning, and we're able to use our experiences. But in the case of trauma, it's like that same apple going directly from your hand straight into your belly, heavy and dense, and our management of that turmoil becomes more difficult. It remains painful and meaningless in its dense form, and requires concentrated practice to break it down. And we can do just that. We can take steps to break down our traumas, relieving ourselves of its density and enriching our lives as we find meaning from the suffering. All trauma is subjective, so the events that may overwhelm one person might not overwhelm others. Oftentimes, this is simply dependent on our factors for susceptibility. Age is one of them. The very old, and especially the very young, are much more susceptible to traumas. In the case of little children, they rely on their caregivers for everything. Their brains aren't fully formed. And actually, the human brain doesn't finish forming until 21 years old, and from then on out, it stays plastic, responding to everything that we encounter. Other factors for susceptibility for trauma include severity of the threat that we encounter, the degree of physical harm that might be inflicted to us, whether or not there's a possibility for escape, the coping skills that I have at my disposal. Do I have any resilience? Have I faced anything similar? The cumulative effects of previous traumas. If I've been worn down by other life events, I'll be more susceptible. And finally, our post-traumatic support system. Who are the people that are standing in my corner, waiting to help me get through it? It's important to understand that trauma changes the brain. Our brains become more fear-driven. Our perception of threats changes. So rather than going out into the world and looking around and seeing beautiful and positive stimuli, neutral stimuli, as well as our threats and our scares, the traumatized brain is only preoccupied with one type of stimuli, the things that are going to challenge us, the things that are threatening us. Secondly, our filtering system is knocked off skew. We're no longer able to determine, is this important right now? To the traumatized brain, it is. And finally, we come to have a dampened ability to be ourselves, to be present, to feel emotion, including feelings of belongingness to our group and having connections. So that disconnection from emotionality occurs within our community, within our families, and it also blocks our perception of our own link to our higher power as we perceive it. And the body plays a role in trauma too. Maybe this is a new idea to all of us. But most interventions right now are still mind-based. But for our greatest impact, we need to address both mind and body because they're inextricably linked. So I'll invite you to have another experience of the body right now. And again, if you'd like to close your eyes, you can. But imagine that you've walked into your kitchen and you notice your sink, you notice the refrigerator, and then you glance down at your countertop. And set on top of your counter is a beautiful yellow lemon that's been sliced in half for you. You pick up that lemon in your hands and you feel its rubbery texture, the dimples in the rind, and even how it puckers to one end. You pick up this lemon half and you raise it up to your nose, and as you squeeze it, it yields to your hand. Juice bubbles up at the surface. It might mist your nose. And then you raise this lemon wedge to your lips. And with your head tilted back, you squeeze the juice of the lemon into your mouth, experiencing that sour pucker. Notice what's happening right now in your body. The body responds to everything that we experience, as well as everything that we think we experience, regardless of whether or not it's real, which is a problem if we have a fear-driven brain that's been traumatized, when we're constantly on the lookout for stimuli reminiscent of our traumas. In a traumatized person, it creates a feedback loop that feels as if the trauma is on play and on repeat. And on the level of the body, that's exactly what's happening. To further understand trauma, we'll look at 3 states of autonomic activation. You might remember the word autonomic from way back in high school biology. Autonomic, like autonomic nervous system, just means automatic. So these are all of the functions of our body that occur whether or not we think about them. We'll breathe no matter what. We'll digest food no matter what. Our heartbeat is going to go even if we don't think about it. And this autonomic or automatic nervous system has 2 subparts. One is for stress, one is for relaxation. And these 2 subparts curate our body's responses to stimuli, and that puts us into one of 3 autonomic states. You might even think of a traffic light, imagining a traffic light with yellow, green on the bottom, red up top. And these represent the 3 autonomic states. Green is the parasympathetic response of, I am safe, I'm at ease, life is normal, I'm able to relax and connect with my community. Yellow is, I am in danger. This is a signal from the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic and stress go together. This means I need to fight or I need to run away. An intense enough experience in this state can traumatize us, even creating symptoms like those that we connect with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And the red light is an ancient response. It's the oldest one available to us, and that's the freeze response. Too much danger and an inability to fight and survive or escape and actually get away, our nervous system shuts down. We become immobilized. This freeze response is dictated to us. There's no process of choice or evaluation. It's completely involuntary. It's the state that the body chooses for us, informed by thousands of years of evolutionary experience. And it's common to enter this state during traumatic experiences. Because the threat to our vitality is so severe, our minds dissociate and disconnect from us. So often, traumatic incidents and their details are only partially remembered, if they're remembered at all. Now, this is still new science with regard to the freeze response, but it gives us so many missing puzzles. Perhaps as we went through this, you're thinking back on times of your life saying, that makes sense of why I responded that way. So with that bit of science, I'm going to pause and I'll open up our discussion for questions related to trauma and its recovery. It's a great question. So the question was, is there a dividing line between ordinary experience and trauma? First, we can break trauma into 2 different categories. We can break it into soft traumas, the things that we encounter in day-to-day life that are still extraordinarily painful, such as your first breakup or grieving a loved one who has passed. And we can also divide that into hard traumas as well, the things that are very sudden, they're out of the ordinary, extremely threatening to our vitality, very small chance of our survival or escape. In either of those situations, it would be dependent on how the brain processes that event. The more threatening it is, the further we'll dip into that freeze response, where all of our rational thought has gone offline and we're working with much more ancient systems. So it really depends on how we qualify trauma. There's no real dividing line because in either situation it's challenging. But if we do go all the way to the freeze response, there's going to require more attention to actually get all the way to the root of the trauma, since a lot of times we won't be able to remember it. So oftentimes it's very difficult to go into talk therapy and disclose information that isn't accessible to you, that has maybe been very repressed or happened at an age so young that we really don't understand it or have much memory of it. In these cases, it's very helpful to work with body-based interventions, such as the ones that I teach, where we focus internally on sensations in the body. So the question is related to school children that have gone through traumas, especially related to the shootings, and what is their long-term effect going to be? It'll largely depend on their factors for susceptibility. So a child that goes home to a really strong and healthy support system is going to have a lesser experience than a child that is already in a setting where maybe the caregivers aren't around, or maybe they go home to very terrifying caregivers. Those children are going to have a more difficult time recovering. But as a whole, children that have experienced traumas in any form that it comes in, whether it's school shootings or being separated from caregivers, these kids, if their trauma is not dealt with, will often develop a pattern of coping with these intense feelings, those apples that haven't been broken down, these intense feelings of trauma, by using different coping mechanisms that we criminalize. So in a traumatized child, they may grow up to be the adult that engages in domestic violence or has unhealthy relationships or abuses substances or is more violent, less socially adapted than their peers around them. So trauma certainly has long-lasting effects if it's not dealt with. Great question. So PTSD is an acronym for post-traumatic stress disorder. And the question was, does PTSD touch lives beyond the military? And the answer is absolutely yes. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, we will see several characteristics. We'll see the changes in the brain, how we tend to become more fear-driven. It'll also show itself looking like different mental illnesses, looking like depression, looking like anxiety, looking like intense irritability and or finding triggers that elicit intense emotional responses way beyond that we might think are appropriate to the situation. And actually, PTSD is extremely common for everyone. Back actually in 1993, so now over 20 years ago, Kessler published a study that showed that 20% of women and almost 10% of men had experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is before the time of really having huge regular upheavals and media repetition. So yes, PTSD touches everybody, and to a degree, for anyone that has ever taken a negative experience and projected it onto their present, it's affected almost all of us. Great, thank you. So the question was using alternative remedies, including yoga, meditation, acupuncture, to treat PTSD. And the answer is yes. We know in yoga and meditation that when we can become more comfortable with our hyperarousal and also look for ways to down-regulate and make ourselves come into a place where we're able to practice relaxation and recovery in that way, we are going to create ourselves a way to recover. With regard to acupuncture, I believe that yes, there's healing available in that as well. There are a lot of different alternative therapies that are being used with great success, including EMDR and EMDR, which is okay. It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So you would do this with someone who's qualified. A therapist can add on to their licensure with special training for EMDR. And it would help the brain reprocess things, remembering a traumatic experience, taking notice of neutral and or positive stimuli, and it thereby creates a buffer in the brain showing that that trauma is in fact a past event. So that's among one of the really promising bodies of research that's out there. Probably closest aligned to acupuncture is EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique tapping, of tapping on the body's energy meridians, which are also used in acupuncture.
I have a question.
Okay, so the question is massage. And massage is also used as an intervention in the style of trauma-informed yoga that I teach. We do not touch. So depending on the person, what their trauma has been, if it doesn't involve being touched inappropriately by another person, massage can be a really healthy place to start. It has also been used with great success with sex offenders. It's not a big field yet, but it is a growing field. Throughout the U.S., we now have 20 schools that teach yoga therapy, which is the highest credential that's available to people that teach yoga right now. And hopefully more of these mind-body professionals will be coming out of school soon to deliver this information across the U.S. So it's small right now, but it's moving, it's growing.
Very good. Thank
All
you very
right.
much.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate your time.